This is one, it was a neat one. They call it the peace dollar. It's very, very light piece of something that's supposedly right out of a missile. And they gave those to us. I don't have one handy, but we gave them a little metal medallion, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. And I have multiple pictures of my trips and my inspection trips. I led I went on like 12 or 15 missions, diplomatic missions to the Soviet Union. And I led teams on, or I participated. Here's one of my teams in front of Lenin's tomb in Moscow at the Red Square. But I went on, and I got to meet, here I am walking through one of the missile sites. These are the kind of outfits we wore, distinctive hats and jackets that had American flag on them. And here's a picture of Russians coming into Rhein-Main Air Base out to do inspections. There's the Russians. They would fly commercial to the point of entry, and we would do the same. We would fly by C-141 to Moscow, or we would fly on the eastern part of the Soviet Union. We would fly out of Yokota, Japan to Ulan-Ude. This is one of the trips is Stalingrad, now called Volgograd, inspection team. So I did about 15 inspections. Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union, I did Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, doing my inspection of treaties. Here's another one in Moscow. Here I am in the middle here. This is one of the FBI buddies. Here's a crushing of the Russians, crushing their missile heads as part of the witnesses in destruction. And that's the White House, with President Reagan recognizing the members of the negotiating team. And here's me escorting General Medvedev to Huntsville, Alabama to do his inspection. And there I am at Huntsville, signing for the United States our copy of the treaty. And that's my Russian counterpart. I can't forget his name. Amikov, I think his name was. And that was his interpreter. And I had a petty officer who was my interpreter. But it was something special, you know, when it's you're signing as a colonel a document that represents the United States of America. And that's on file someplace. But it was a monumental thing to be done. Here we are. They like to give us a little refreshments out of inspection. Here I am with my interpreter and the Russian colonel, the local guide, and his interpreter. It's funny, most of the Russian interpreters were officers, and our interpreters were mostly enlisted people. E5s on up. We also use U.S. government contract interpreters, civilians. And this was supposedly the biggest cannon ever. Here I am with my team. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is when my retirement, the Russians kept asking, teams going over late 1992, is Colonel Forest coming back on a mission? So I told the boss, why don't I go visit our detachment in Moscow and pay my respect to the people I've been working with for 4 years, my counterparts. So he agreed. So I got my interpreter, a civilian here, I took with me, and we spent a day doing our duty at the embassy in Moscow. And here I kept a copy. Well, you had to have permission. I have a copy of the cable says, Embassy welcomes to Moscow the visit of Colonel Forest. So that was my official, and I went not in the capacity as an inspector, but as a diplomat from the embassy. So I had my business that I did at the embassy, and the next morning I was invited to the Ministry of Defense the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center for the Soviet side, the Russian side then, and they gave me a retirement reception. They all wrote this document. They gave me a tour, and they said I was the first American officer to actually visit their NRRC. So I thought that one was kind of special. And one of the reasons, and I took them some gifts. I took Army T-shirts. I took a wine serving set, which government paid for this stuff. You know, it was official. It was an official gift. And I think one of the reasons that they did that through the years, because during the negotiations, General Medvedev was a senior military person on the Russian side, General Medvedev. And he also was the one in charge of their Nuclear Risk Reduction Center to implement the treaty. I was the only one on the U.S. side that was in negotiation that also was important in implementing the treaty. So for almost 7 years, I had contact, or 6 years, with General Medvedev. And when he would come, I would, for instance, on one trip, I said, I would take you down to the museum at Quantico. I did. And I had a Marine corporal was my interpreter. We took him to tour the museum down there and had a lunch at the Globe and Laurel, famous Marine place outside the post at Quantico. And then we had dinner. We would my wife and General's wife, we had dinner with him when they'd come on a trip to Washington. And when he was on a mission in Brussels, I knew he was on a team. I told the boss, General Medvedev is on this inspection, so I'm going over. He said, okay. And I asked an FBI guy, you want to go on this trip with me? He said, sure, counterintelligence guy. So the two of us flew. We got to Brussels about the time General Medvedev and his team landed. And while out doing the inspection of the ground-launched cruise missile site in Belgium, we were out there, and I asked the representative from the embassy, who always comes when there's a team, whichever country, and someone from the embassy will be there to represent the ambassador. And I said, does Ambassador Glipman know that General Medvedev is here? Ambassador Glipman was in charge of the negotiation of the INF Treaty. And after the treaty was signed, he was made ambassador to Belgium. And he said, well, I don't know. I'll call. So about 30 minutes later, I get a phone call. Ambassador Glipman wants to talk to you. I said, hey, sir, how you doing? You know, whatever, you know, because we became friends after we did the treaty. And he said, could you bring General Medvedev down for cocktails to the embassy? I said, sir, I'll take him in where I want to. You think I would have asked Washington if I could do this? They would say, no, you can't take him outside of the inspection parameters. But I asked General Medvedev if he would like to go. He said, yes. I said, okay, you can take one interpreter. I'll take an interpreter and we'll go visit. So we did. I took an Air Force sergeant, which I said, get your money because we're going to be paying for dinner and whatever. Because we would always have money with our teams to pay for everything, because we were responsible for feeding them, transport, and whatever. So the four of us went down to the embassy. Ambassador Glipman had his wife there. The Belgian ambassador on arms control, he was there with his wife. So we had a nice cocktail visit for an hour. Then I walked General Medvedev and his interpreter and my interpreter. The four of us walked down 3 or 4 blocks to the old plaza where I used to go, because I went to Brussels every 6 weeks as a representative to the SEC. And we went to dinner in the place I used to go to, and we probably got the only table there. They just knew I had it reserved. So we had a nice dinner, and the general said, I'll have what you have. And we had a nice dinner. Then we walked over to the Hilton where we always stayed. I bought him a bourbon, and we took a taxi back to join the team. So he remembered that. And so as time went, and when our first colonel started retiring, I said, we need to do something to recognize what they've been doing working with us. So I wrote a document, which I had and got it a certificate, and they got the general sign it. We sent it by a diplomatic pouch to our embassy to present to this colonel when he retired. So I think that's the reason I did those kind of things, that they wanted to recognize me as you know, not someone that was compatible with them, but someone they dealt with, they knew and they understood, who knew the treaty, and they appreciated I was just straightforward, and we we treated each other as a gentleman with respect. And that's one of the reasons I think that they wanted to give me a retirement reception, which is what they did. So I brought back other things, flags of the Soviet Union, of the different republics, overcoat and hats. We put these signs on our vehicles, magnetic signs on our vehicles, OSIA, with the U.S. and the Soviet emblems, flags. And they gave me tons of stuff like T-shirts. That's not too well made. See, it's leaking. That's a vodka flask. Belts, hat, overcoat. I actually bought the overcoat. They didn't give it to me. It cost me $10 equivalent, which was which at that time exchange rate, it was about $600, because they were really bad balance with a dollar at that time. I mean, that was a lot of money if you converted it to rubles. But I paid $10 for it. And my interpreter brought it back for me. And that's the rank of Major of Field Artillery. They cross cannons just like us. Of course, we gave them hats. And over here, of course, I had a lot of FBI work with me, counterintelligence. And I asked the deputy director, we should put some of these FBI guys on a team so they can learn about what it's like, because they took care of the situation in the U.S. We always had FBI around in every town we went to. So I started putting one agent on almost every team so they could, and they really loved it. So the FBI thought the world of me. That's why I have recognition from the director of Sessions, the FBI. Actually, I was in his office when he presented an award to one of the FBI agents. And FBI hat. These are the hats that we wore. Some are lightweight one and heavyweight. Of course, we had parkers. We had heavy clothes. We had everything furnished by the government except boots. We had to buy our own boots, but we had all kind of heavy duty for snow and terrible weather. I only made about one trip, and I picked the time I wanted to go, and I didn't go in the dead of winter, but to Volgograd once, and that was enough for me.